Have you ever heard of a tree that can curse you? In this ancient African folktale, a village faces the wrath of a talking tree that punishes anyone who dares to touch it. Long before metal roof and road came to Odu village, there stood a towering tree at the edge of the forest. Twisted, ancient, its bark black as night, and its roots curled like sleeping serpents. They called it Nwele, the tree that watches. No one planted it, yet it had always been there, older than memory, older than the land. Birds never perched on it, shade never fell beneath it, and no child dared play nearby. It was forbidden to speak to it, forbidden to touch it, because once, long ago, it spoke. They say it happened during the dry season, when the sky cracked and rain refused to fall. A farmer leaned against it, out of exhaustion, and the bark whispered, "Greedy hand will wither." That farmer returned to the village with a swollen arm, blackened fingers, and died by sundown. Since then, the elders warned, the tree sees the soul of men. It speaks not to harm, but to warn. But over time, the warning became myth. Children mocked it with laughter. Youth passed it with careless whistles. Until one day, a man came who did not believe in warnings. A man who laughed even louder than the children. His name was Obalola, and he would be the first to touch the tree in over 30 years, the first to test the patience of Nwele. And when he did, the wind did not blow. The birds did not flee. Only the tree responded, with a voice like grinding stone. "You were warned. Now watch." From that day on, Odu village would never know peace again. Obalola was not a poor man. He owned goats, wives, and a piece of land that caught the first morning sun. But it wasn't enough. Never enough. He had heard tales of the tree's spirit, of treasures buried beneath it, guarded by ancestral magic. So when the market women spoke in hush about a mango tree that dropped gold-like fruit near Nwele, Obalola's eyes lit with greed. "What spirit?" he scoffed, loud in the square. "I fear no bark, only hunger." And hunger drove him. That night, when the village danced for rain, Obalola slipped away, machete in hand, sack over shoulder. He entered the forest alone. The moon was full, but did not light his path. No crickets chirped, no leaves rustled. And yet, he found the tree, tall, silent, unmoving. He stepped closer and whispered, "Let me touch what others fear." His hand reached out, fingers grazing the bark. It was cold, too cold, like it had not seen sun in 100 years. Then it pulsed beneath his palm, like a beating heart. Obalola jumped back, but it was too late. The roots shifted, slightly. The ground breathed, the tree whispered, "Take what you seek, but know, every gain demands a wound." He scoffed again, but his voice trembled. Greed does not listen. It only takes. And take he did. He cut a piece of bark, wrapped it, and ran home laughing. Behind him, the tree groaned, not in pain, but in promise. That night, Obalola's compound grew strangely hot. Not warm, hot. His goats bleated wildly, and his youngest wife screamed that her mat was smoking. But no fire burned, just heat, rising from the floors, seeping from the walls, filling their nostrils with the scent of burning wood. Yet nothing was burning. In the middle of the compound, the sack with the bark twitched. His eldest son kicked it aside, and the heat vanished. Just like that. Obalola laughed it off, saying, "Spirits don't frighten men who build their own roofs." But the next morning, his first goat dropped dead. Then his second. Then his third. By dusk, the stables were empty. The herbalist was summoned. He examined the sack, sniffed it, and dropped it with shaking hands. "Where did this come from?" he asked. Obalola shrugged. "From a tree." "Not just any tree," the herbalist whispered. "You have brought back breath from the earth's mouth, and now it breathes fire into your house." Obalola waved him off, but the elder warned. "The tree doesn't curse in anger, it curses in balance." That night, Obalola's first wife bled from her ears. His second lost her voice. And Obalola, he did not sleep. For in the quiet, the bark in the sack whispered, not in words, but in pulses, like a heartbeat, like warning. Still, Obalola kept it close, for pride had already built a room in his heart. And pride never lets the door open for fear. By the end of the week, the village began to whisper. They noticed Obalola no longer came to the square. His wives stopped visiting the stream. Smoke never rose from his kitchen. The palm wine seller swore she saw shadows dancing inside his hut when no fire was lit. The chief sent a messenger, but he returned pale, saying the house smelled of blood and pepper leaves. Children pointed at birds flying in circles above his roof. Vultures, not crows. One elder suggested cleansing, but another whispered, "You cannot cleanse a man who carries the forest on his back." At night, drums sounded from Obalola's compound, but no one played them. And then, the tree began to speak again, but not from the forest, from people's dreams. First, the children, then the women, then even the dogs whimpered in their sleep. The tree said one thing: "He touched, he took, now return." And in every dream, the bark bled like skin. The chief grew worried. He called a council, but they were divided. Some said exile, some said sacrifice, others said nothing, because silence sometimes hides shame. But the wind knew, the birds knew, even the river slowed at its edge. Something was stirring, rooted deep in bark and bone. And soon, Obalola would not be the only one cursed. It happened at midday. The market was full, traders haggling, children chasing goats, drums, tapping. Then came the sound, not thunder, not wind, but voice. A voice too deep to belong to man, yet too familiar to be beast. It echoed from the edge of the forest, where Nwele stood. "Return what was taken," it said, loud, clear, impossible. The calabashes dropped from women's hands. The yam seller fell to his knees. Even the chief stumbled from his stool. And then, silence. Not a leaf moved. Not a bird chirped. Just the memory of a voice that didn't belong in the daylight. A brave hunter ran toward the forest to see for himself. He returned without his right foot. He claimed a root had burst from the ground and snapped like a crocodile's mouth. The herbalist, who once mocked tales of the tree, began burning herbs at his doorstep. Mothers refused to send their children to the stream. And in the square, no one laughed anymore. Because when a tree speaks, something deeper listens. That night, the village stayed indoors. Lanterns dimmed early. Doors shut tight. The tree had spoken, not in riddle, but in warning. And the people knew. The forest no longer slept. It watched. It remembered. And it waited. Obalola's name was no longer said aloud. He was not a man anymore. He was a wound. A wound the village had ignored. And wounds, when left alone, begin to speak too. It began with footsteps. Heavy ones, heard at night, circling compounds. But when doors opened, nothing. Then came the shadows. They moved differently, not like people or beasts, but slow and tall, stretching across walls with no body to cast them. One woman swore she saw a shadow drink from her water pot. Another saw one crouch near her child's mat. The dogs refused to bark. They whimpered and hid. And by the third night, the shadows began to whisper. No one understood the words, but they understood the fear. A cold that sank into the bones, even under blankets. People lit fires in corners of their huts. Men placed charms under pillows, but the shadows came still. Then, one morning, a boy was found in the square, alive but mute, his eyes wide, his skin cold. In his hand, he clutched a torn leaf. Not from any village tree, but dark, thick, heavy with sap that smelled like old blood. The healer wept when he saw it. Ngwele's leaf, he said, plucked by spirits, given as warning. Obalola's house remained sealed, no sound, no smoke, just stillness. But the shadows danced around it more than anywhere else. And the people began to fear him more than the tree, because the tree only spoke. Obalola had touched. He had brought the forest into the village. And now, the village belonged to the forest. Every footstep, every breath, felt like it echoed through roots. Obalola had not left his compound in days. The walls wept at night. The floor hissed when stepped upon. He had buried the bark in his backyard, thinking the earth might forget. But nothing forgets the tongue of a cursed tree. Each night, his wives saw visions. Faces in the fire, hands reaching from the walls. But it was Obalola who changed most. He spoke less. His eyes sunk deeper. One morning he stood before his brass mirror, the one he once polished with pride. But the man who stared back was not himself. His skin peeled like bark. His teeth blackened. Behind him, in the reflection, stood the tree, though he was inside. No branches, no leaves. Just the form, watching. He blinked. It was gone. He turned around. Nothing. But the scent of sap hung in the air, the kind that oozes from wounds too deep to clot. Obalola fell to his knees. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. But there was no answer. Only a small root sprouting between the floor cracks, twisting, curling toward him. He grabbed his machete and struck. The root bled. Not water, blood. Thick, black. The machete steamed in his hand. He dropped it and screamed. Outside, the villagers heard it, but no one moved. The chief spat into the fire. "He was warned," he muttered. And deep in the forest, Ngwele rustled once. Not from wind, but laughter. On the sixth night, the earth trembled. Not enough to shake huts, but enough to make spoons clatter. Enough to wake even the blind. It came from behind Obalola's house. The ground cracked like dry lips. Smoke seeped from the split. And in the dark, a sound rose. A gurgling moan, low and sorrowful, like the cry of something buried too long. The villagers stood far, watching. The crack widened. From it came roots. Not just roots. Black tendrils. Thick and pulsing. They slithered across Obalola's backyard, circling the spot where the bark was buried. The soil bubbled, and then it spoke. Not with voice, but with feeling. A force pushed into every chest, every heart. Balance must be restored, it whispered into minds. The elders gathered, with calabashes of salt, kola, and palm oil, but the wind slapped them down. Too late, the air seemed to say. Too late to undo. Only return. That night the crack closed itself, but something had changed. The air carried weight. The birds left. Even insects went silent. And Obalola's hut, it pulsed with an unseen breath. His wives had fled. His goats, long dead. Only he remained. Alone, surrounded by roots, speaking to the walls. I only took bark, he said, again and again. But the tree had said it from the start. Every gain demands a wound. And his wound was not on his body. It was in the land. And the land never forgets. The village awoke to drums. Not from the square, not from human hands, but from the forest. A slow, deliberate rhythm. One beat, pause, then two. It came with the morning mist and stayed through the heat. The elders gathered beneath the shrine tree, their eyes sunken with dread. That is not for dance, one said. That is a call. But a call to what? None could answer. The drumbeats began seeping into everything. The sound echoed in calabashes, in footsteps, even in hearts. Children clutched their ears. Women wept without knowing why. The blacksmith's hammer broke mid-swing. The hunter missed every target. Something in the air had shifted. The village pulsed, as if it were breathing in time with the rhythm. That night, the sound stopped, but dreams did not. Every sleeper in Odu saw the same vision. The tree, weeping red sap, roots coiling around a man's neck, and each dream ended with a whisper. Return it. When the villagers awoke, they found the shrine drum split in two. The crack ran straight through its center, filled with black soil and a single fresh leaf, Nwele's leaf. The drummers refused to play again. The chief stopped speaking. The elders burned herbs, but the smoke curled back into their faces. What drummed in the forest was not a warning. It was a countdown. And deep below the village, where roots moved like veins, something began to stir. Older than the tree. Older than language. It was not angry. It was coming. Kojo was 12. Too curious, too stubborn. He had heard the stories, heard the warnings. But still, he followed the whisper beneath his floor. Every night, his mat trembled slightly, as if something scratched from below. When he pressed his ear to the ground, he heard music. Faint, like a flute, but not made by breath. One night, he lit a small lantern and dug behind his mother's hut. The soil was soft, almost inviting. Just inches down, he found it. A thin, dark root, pulsing like a heartbeat. Kojo followed it. It snaked toward the forest, disappearing under fences and past sleeping goats. He walked in silence, the lantern flickering with each step. The root led him to Nwele, not the base but the side, where bark had been stripped, exposing flesh like wood. He reached out, trembling. Then, a voice, clear, ancient, echoed in his chest. Do not take, only return. Kojo stumbled back. The lantern dropped. He turned to run. But the forest had changed. The path was gone. Trees stood differently. Closer. He was lost. When the sun rose, the villagers found him coiled at Nwele's roots. Eyes wide, face calm, mouth sealed with sap. He wasn't dead, but he would not speak again. The healer said his tongue was clean, untouched, but he no longer heard voices, nor responded to his name. Only one thing moved him. When the drums played again, his head nodded to the rhythm. Slowly, silently, in time. And the tree, its bark had begun to heal, but it still waited, because one wound had been made, and many more were due. They brought the oracle from the hills. Old woman, blind in one eye, hair like grey thread, voice like wind on gravel. She came walking with bare feet, her staff carved with coils of roots. No one spoke as she arrived. She did not greet. She did not eat. She sat near the ash tree and placed her hands on the ground. The earth hissed under her touch. She closed her eye and whispered. The land remembers, she said. Not with anger, but with rhythm. The villagers leaned in. You cut what was never yours. You touched what watched in silence. You stole breath from a living memory. The chief stepped forward. How do we restore balance? The oracle tilted her head. Return what was taken. Not just the bark, but the respect, the silence, the distance. The healer asked, and if we don't? She looked up. Then you will become part of it. No one slept that night. The oracle lay on bare ground. She dreamed of Obalola, standing within a tree, arms outstretched, roots weaving through his ribs. The earth was reclaiming him, not in rage, but in duty. The tree is not cursed, she told them in the morning. It is a memory too full to forget, and when memories overflow, they become rivers. She pointed toward the village. Yours is flooding now. Then she left. No goodbyes. Only footprints in the dirt, shaped like leaves. And the drums played again, softer now. Not warning, not war, but mourning. And still, Obalola did not return. The elders gathered under the shrine tree and agreed. Something must be done. Not to erase, but to surrender. They could not uncut the bark, nor unspeak the name, but they could dig. So they did. All day, men, women, even children carried sticks, hoes, and shovels. They dug beside Nwele, not deep, just enough to offer. Into the pit, they placed calabashes of honey, herbs, feathers, collar notes, and old songs, written on dried banana leaves. They sang the names of the forgotten. They danced without drum, only footfalls. And when the sun dipped, they placed a piece of bark, now dry and pale, wrapped in white cloth, into the earth. Then they covered it, slowly. No words, only silence. As they stood around it, the wind circled once, lifting dust, wrapping it around the tree like a shawl. The leaves trembled, the branches groaned, and the ground beneath their feet throbbed once, like a giant sigh. Then stillness. The healer placed both palms on the soil and whispered, "Let it rest." That night no shadows came, no drums, no voices, just quiet, the kind that comes after a storm, when the land exhales. And in the morning, something bloomed near the burial spot, small, green, glowing softly. No one touched it, no one dared, but they smiled, because balance, once broken, does not shatter, it shifts. And Nwele, the tree stood tall, watching, breathing, and perhaps forgiving. For now, her name was Nia, the quiet one, daughter of the drum maker, barefoot dreamer, and the only child who had never feared the forest. While others avoided Nwele, Nia watched it from afar, studying its roots, its stillness, its sighs in the wind. She was there when the offering was buried. She heard the songs, but days after, while others resumed their chores, Nia returned to the tree, not to speak, but to dance. Alone, beneath the rising moon, she moved with slow, deliberate grace. Her feet stirred the dust like wind. Her arms swayed like leaves. No drum played, yet rhythm pulsed through her. She danced not for show, but for the earth, and the earth noticed. The tree rustled once, low and deep. Roots shifted slightly beneath the soil. Nia stopped, but did not flee. She bowed to the trunk, then whispered, "I know you remember." That night she dreamed of a forest in fire, a woman swallowed by bark, and a baby placed at the tree's base, wrapped in cloth. She awoke with dirt under her fingernails and sap on her palms. When she told the elders, they grew still. "You have been chosen," the oracle said, "summoned back by signs. You carry memory now." Nia didn't understand. Not yet. But something inside her chest had changed. Like a drum had been placed there. One that beat not with fear, but with purpose. And for the first time since the curse began, the tree seemed calm, like it was listening again. At dawn, the sky turned grey, not with storm, but with a strange softness. The villagers gathered outside, eyes tilted upward. It began not with thunder, but a quiet sigh. Then the rain came, but not as they had known it. The drops didn't fall. They rose, from the ground, upward, lifting from leaves, soil and skin, into the air like reverse tears. It was not cold, not harsh, just wet, gentle, cleansing. The oracle stood in the center of the village, arms outstretched. "The land is washing memory," she declared, "not to forget, but to make space." People stood still as water rose from their feet, leaving prints of ash and root beneath them. The well overflowed with clear liquid. The river ran smooth, and the birds, silent for moons, sang. But only one tree remained dry. Ngwele. Its trunk shed no water. Its roots did not drink, as though it had no more to clean. It had already wept enough. Nia approached it, cupped a handful of rain in her hands, and placed it at its base. The tree shimmered slightly, not visibly, but in the way one feels goosebumps. The villagers gasped as flowers bloomed near its roots, violet, flame-shaped, and soft to the touch. Flowers no one had seen before. "It is done," said the oracle. "The tree has accepted the apology, but the memory remains. Because even when pain passes, stories linger in the soil, and in Odu village, every drop that touched the earth now whispered, 'Remember, no one saw him come. One morning he was simply there, sitting beneath Ngwele, thin, barefoot, eyes sunken, like deep wells, his beard long, his lips cracked, his clothes rotted like leaves in Hamatan. Obalola had returned, not as a man, but as something in between.' The villagers didn't approach. They watched from behind doors, wondering if the tree had spared or swallowed him. He said nothing, just sat, hands on the ground, eyes staring upward at the twisted canopy. Nia, brave and steady, walked up to him. "Why did you return?" she asked softly. He didn't blink. "I never left," he whispered, "only buried deeper." She sat beside him. The tree rustled, low and calm. He looked at her, and for the first time in moons, he wept, not from sorrow, but from release. "It showed me everything," he said. "What I took, what I broke, what I disturbed." He held out a small bundle. Inside, a piece of bark, now green at its edge. "It gave this back to me." Nia took it with both hands, then buried it once more beside the offerings, and as the final scoop of soil touched it, Ngwele shook slightly, like a man sighing in sleep. Obalola did not ask for forgiveness. He only lay down beside the roots, and never rose again. But the tree did not curse him. It simply covered him, slowly, gently, with leaves. And in that moment, Odu village understood. Punishment is not always pain. Sometimes it is remembrance. Sometimes it is peace. Seasons passed. The flowers by the tree never withered. The drums returned to the square, not with fear, but with joy. Children played again, though none dared touch Ngwele. They told stories instead, of Obalola, of Nia, of the tree that once cursed, then healed. Nia became the village keeper of memory. She sat beneath Ngwele, telling stories to those who would listen, not to scare, but to teach. "Ngwele is not evil," she would say, "only old. And like the old ones, it demands respect." The oracle passed peacefully. The healer retired. A new chief rose, one who danced barefoot near the roots in honor. The tree no longer whispered warnings, but when storms came, its branches held firm. When drought visited, its shade remained cool. One day, a traveler came and asked to touch its bark. The villagers told him no, not in anger, but in love. "Touching is not always understanding," Nia told him. "Sometimes we honor by distance." And so the tree stood, not cursed, not feared, but remembered, roots deep in earth, branches wide like history, a monument not of wood, but of wisdom. And long after Nia's hair turned silver, she planted a seed beside Nwele, a gift for the next generation. It grew quickly, strong and straight, but she warned, it too will watch, and if forgotten, it too may speak. Because in Odu, every root, every leaf, every whisper in the wind carried one lesson. Those who listen to nature walk in peace. Those who don't, feed the roots their bones. Years passed. The forest healed, and Odu village prospered again. But one day, a stranger arrived, tall, loud, with a merchant's bag and a foreign tongue. His name was Kobi, and he came seeking rare herbs, roots, and charms to sell in distant lands. The villagers warned him about Nwele. They told the tale with lowered voices, but Kobi only laughed. A tree that curses? I've felled bigger things with one hand. He scoffed at Nia's warnings and rolled his eyes when the chief refused him access. That night he slipped from the guest hut, machete in hand, and vanished into the forest. He returned at dawn, soaked in sweat, eyes wide with confusion. I reached the spot, but the tree was gone. He stammered. The forest swallowed my path. No birds, no moon, only silence. His bag was empty. His skin bore scratches like thorns had danced on his back. The villagers did not speak. They only watched. That evening, Kobi tried to leave, but the road curved back toward the village. He tried again and again, until he collapsed in the square, sobbing. The land won't let me go. The oracle's daughter approached. Nwele has no voice for outsiders. It speaks through the land now. And the land had decided disrespect was not just remembered, it was contained. Kobi would never leave Odu, not until he learned what the tree already knew, that some roots go deeper than footsteps, and some journeys never return the same way twice. On the hottest day of the year, something strange happened. The sun stood high, and shadows stretched long across Odu, except one place. Nwele. Though the tree towered tall and wide, its base cast no shadow, not even a flicker. Birds perched in nearby trees, but none landed on its branches. The goats grazed near, but made a slow circle around it, refusing to step close. Children, curious, traced their hands along the dusty path, searching for outline, but nothing. A tree without shadow is a spirit unchained, the healer muttered. Nia placed a calabash of cool water at its root, whispering thanks, but even the reflection showed no trace of leaves above. That night, elders gathered and lit fires to examine the base, thinking it a trick of light, but the firelight danced on every surface, except Nwele's bark. It remained untouched by flicker, untouched by time. Then came a new voice, rising in many minds, not spoken aloud. I am not here to shade. I am here to show. They understood. Nwele no longer lived to protect from sun or rain. It now stood as a mirror of past deeds, of buried truths, of what happens when man forgets his place. The shadowless tree became sacred, not because it shielded, but because it revealed. In time, the villagers painted white stones around it, not as fence, but as honor, to remind themselves silence does not mean absence, and a tree that casts no shadow is not empty. It is full of memory, of judgment, and of mercy not yet spoken. The air that night was different, still, yet thick with vibration, the kind that makes one's bones feel heavy. Then came the sound, not loud, not sharp, but deep and constant. A hum, rising from the earth like a lullaby, sung in an ancient tongue. At first only Nia heard it. Then the animals stirred. Then the children began humming in their sleep. Finally, the drums in the shrine thumped, once, No hands touched them. The oracle's daughter stood and said, "The roots are singing." Villagers gathered at Nwele. The ground beneath it pulsed in rhythm. No wind, no thunder, only song. And with the song came dreams. Shared dreams. Of the first ancestor planting a seed in silence. Of a woman crying beside a tree, her tears birthing leaves. Of flames and hands and forgiveness spoken not in words, but in soil. The song told of all that had been lost, and all that had been kept safe in the roots. Some wept, others swayed, and the children, still asleep, chanted words they had never learned. We are the memory, we are the land. The singing lasted until dawn. Then silence. A silence not of dread, but of knowing. The next morning, the ground where the tree stood was soft, fragrant. Flowers bloomed in patterns like symbols. The healer said, "Noel has not ended. It has begun again." From that day, the villagers no longer feared the tree's voice. They waited for it, they welcomed it. Because when the land sings, those who listen become more than people. They become part of the story. It was Nya who found it. A small, golden seed, nestled beside her mat, glowing faintly at dawn. It hadn't fallen from a tree. It hadn't rolled from a basket. It had appeared. She cupped it in her palm and felt a hum, as if it had a heartbeat. The oracle's daughter looked at it and nodded. "It's ready." But they did not plant it near Nwele. No, the tree had whispered differently in her sleep. Far enough to grow, close enough to remember. So Nya walked with the villagers across the field, beyond the stream, toward the edge of land untouched by root or shadow. There she knelt, dug with her hands, and placed the seed into soft soil. "May you grow in truth, not fear," she whispered. They covered it together, poured water, and sang, not chants of protection, but songs of welcome. Within minutes, a green sprout pushed through. The land accepted it. It had chosen. This new tree, not cursed, not haunted, but aware. It would not be Nwele. It would be a companion, a reminder, a listener. The villagers called it Ndidi, meaning patience. And from that day, they visited both trees, not to touch, but to speak, to sing, to listen. Because now they understood. The earth is not mute. It hears, it holds, and it answers, not in haste but in time. In Odu, stories grew with the crops, and roots no longer strangled. They embraced, for those who remember the tree that once cursed them had now learned to bless through the seeds they dared to respect. The rains came early that year, soft, healing rains, not like the angry storms of seasons past. The crops flourished, the river sang, children laughed again beneath mango trees. And Nwele, it stood as ever, tall and quiet, but something had changed. Its branches stretched higher than before, reaching not just towards sun, but beyond. One morning, a hunter looked up and gasped. The top of Nwele had begun to flower, golden petals that shimmered like morning dew caught in firelight. The villagers gathered. Even elders, who once trembled near the bark, now approached it with reverence. The oracle's daughter declared, "Nwele no longer watches in silence. It reaches for the sky, not to escape, but to share." That night, those flowers shed their petals, light as dust, glowing as they floated down. People caught them in their palms. They dissolved instantly, leaving warmth on the skin and a quiet knowing in the heart. The healer murmured, "The tree has forgiven." But more than that, it has understood us. Because sometimes, the deepest wisdom doesn't come from punishing those who forget, but from reminding them again and again, until they remember. And now, the tree remembered them, not with pain, but with grace. For a root may begin in darkness, but a branch, if guided well, may bloom in light. Years later, children were born with strange signs, marks on their backs like bark, eyes that shimmered in moonlight, ears that twitched at the sound of wind through leaves. The villagers did not fear them. They called them Eziolu, children of the root. These children walked calmly near trees, spoke to animals, and wept when flowers were trampled. They did not scream. They listened, and they listened deeply. When they played near Ndidi, the new tree, its branches tilted slightly, like greeting an old friend. One child, barely 5, placed his tiny palm on the earth and whispered, "She says thank you." No one asked who she was. They knew the tree had not just cursed. It had taught. It had passed memory through sap and seed, until memory became blood. These children would never raise machetes at trees. They would not laugh at the wind's whisper. Instead, they'd sit beneath branches and learn. And so the village changed, not through laws, but through stories. Not through fear, but through presence. Niwele was no longer just a tree. It was a shrine, a witness, a library without walls. And those born after the storm walked gently, not because they were weak, but because they had seen what strength did when it forgot kindness. The bark children would carry the story, not with shouting, but with roots. The oracle's daughter, now old and slow, came to Niwele one last time. Her legs trembled, her voice thinner, but her eyes remained steady. She carried no staff, no chalk, no charms. Only her breath, and the final song passed from her mother. She sang it alone, at dusk, beneath the great tree. Before there was man, there was root. Before there was war, there was seed. Let memory grow where machetes once cut. Let voice grow where silence once lived. As her voice faded, Niwele's leaves rustled in perfect harmony, and then she lay down beside the roots, smiling, unafraid. The villagers found her there, sleeping in earth's embrace, her hair crowned in falling petals. They did not mourn with wailing. They sang her song, again and again, until the ground hummed. She was not buried in the ground, but beneath the tree, a resting place not of death, but of return. From her burial spot, the first twin sprouts of a new sapling rose the next season. Side by side, no one touched them. They simply built a circle around them, with stories, with songs, with respect. And thus, even the ones who departed found their way back, not in ghostly form, but in renewal. The oracle did not end. She returned to the memory. Years turned to decades. Generations passed, and Odu changed, not in buildings, not in wealth, but in rhythm. Every home had a carved bowl of roots. Every child knew Niwele's tale. In time, the story reached other villages, then towns, then cities. They came, scholars, wanderers, elders who wanted to remember. They sat in circles, listening to Nia's grandchildren recount how a tree once spoke, cursed, healed, and forgave. The story was never written on paper. It lived in mouths, in drums, in wind. In a world that had long silenced the wisdom of trees, Odu became a sacred voice, a keeper of memory, a shrine of the living tale. And Niwele, it stood still, always. But now it was surrounded by laughter, by music, by voices that no longer mocked, but honored. Because the tree had done what few could. It had warned without destroying, waited without hatred, taught without shouting. It had shown that the earth remembers every footstep, but forgives the ones who turn back and bow. And so, the curse became a chorus, a living reminder that the land is not to be conquered, but understood, not to be feared, but respected. And in Odu, when the wind moves through the trees, they say, "Listen well." The talking tree is not gone. it has only become us. We hope you enjoyed today's story. Give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section below. That's all for today. Take care, folks.